Okay. If everyone's here and the judges are two, Sabrina, are you here too?
Yes, I'm here.
Awesome. 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 Would anyone like to say anything before the round starts? Okay. Then, yeah, Washington, whenever you guys are ready.
Okay. Let me set up my timer. And just to give a quick roadmap, this speech is going to be one off, then it's just going to go to my case. 3, 2, 1, go. Hi, Judge. My name is Nicole. I'm going to be the first speaker on the Gov side today. Just going straight into the A's interpretation that debaters might not keep their cameras on from the start of the round. B is a violation. Our opponents have their cameras on. We're going to define camera as a device used by the computer to record photographs and video, which can be used to render video in software program. Example with Zoom. Okay, so standards here is going to be the first is going to be the environment, which in a study by Purdue in 2021, just an hour of video conferencing emits more than 1,000 grams of carbon dioxide. In comparison, that would be in the emissions of almost half a gallon of gas. It requires 2 to 12 liters of water and demands a land area adding up to the size of an iPad. May seem small, but that's only for one person and for 1 hour web call. Leaving your camera off during a web call can reduce these footprints by 96%. To put this into perspective, there are an average of 300 million web calls every day with an average of 40-minute call time. This leads us to an estimated CO2 emission of 240 billion grams, which could be decreased to a mere 9.6 billion grams. Although we aren't completely solving the problem, it is deniable that web calls are essential for many careers, so removing it completely wouldn't be reasonable. Decreasing the carbon emissions by 230 billion CO2 grams is worth it for the mere inconvenience of no video. Decreasing emissions by 96 billion tons of CO2 every year. By Virginia University, a study in 2022, it shows that the amount of energy saved versus lost by using tools in the web and Google Meet calls, it was found that there was an increase of more than 900 joules of energy when the camera was on compared to when it was off. Now the voting is going to be education. There's going to be no education here if everyone's going to be dive to climate change and for paradigmatic issues a priori, because we know the rules of the game before we play the game. Second is going to be here is drop the debater because so they don't commit further abuse and people don't quit partly. The next here is going to be competing interests of reasonability, because reasonability has no bright line and RBI is bad because we wouldn't be running the show if they didn't do the abuse. It creates a chilling effect. Okay, now let's go on to the case. So we support the resolution that this House regrets the memorialization of Pablo Escobar in popular culture. So we're going to define memorialization as the preserve of the memory of or commemorate. So Pablo Escobar was a Colombian drug lord, a narco-terrorist, and a politician who was the founder and sole leader of the Medellin cartel, a highly powerful drug and terrorist organization. We're going to define regret to disapprove of. We're going to define popular culture as a collection of ideas, objects, and practices that are popular in a society at a given time. It can include art, music, television, fashion, and more. So just for some quick background information, Escobar in 2010, by Robert Escobar's brother, details of how he became infamous and died. He is also been portrayed in numerous television shows and movies, such as Narcos. So we're going to frame this round as a value round due to the word regrets. And our value criterion for this round is going to be utilitarianism. So which is going to be the most amount of good for the most amount of people. So now let's get into our first contention here. It's going to be about Colombia's reputation. The first uniqueness here is that the Colombian government and many citizens want to move past Pablo Escobar. The second uniqueness here is in 2019, the Colombian government demolished the Monaco building, one of Escobar's former residences in Medellin. This act was symbolic of the city's efforts to break away from its violent past and focus on honoring victims rather than glorifying Pablo Escobar. Our third uniqueness here is that Colombia's historical association with Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel did impact the country's reputation for use, and to some extent still has some lingering effects on trade and foreign investment. But the fourth uniqueness here is that after this is just kind of like
POI.
similar situation. Yes.
Do you have like any tangible evidence of how it has impacted trade and like foreign?
Yeah, I'll get to it. I'm still going. So just like a similar situation, after 9/11, the US stopped trading with Middle Eastern countries. That's just another example. Now, the fifth uniqueness here is that 42.5% of Colombia's Colombia's poverty rate. And uniqueness 6 here is that the US, Europe, the European Union, and Latin American countries stopped trading with Colombia after Pablo Escobar. It's still today, it's not as as impactful, but it's still going on. For example, the US has sanctions. And okay, just for links here, that Colombia gets a bad reputation from Pablo Escobar, and that results in other countries wanting to trade with them. And that results in Colombia losing out on a lot of resources that they need. The impacts of this is economy, because Colombia doesn't get the trades they need, and is going to cause for their economy to get worse, because it is essential for Colombia, because these are like really big trade partners. Yeah, and also it's going to increase Colombia's poverty rate. So it increased Colombia's poverty rate. So it was, yeah. Now, second contention here is going to just be the philosophical immorality of remembering the wicked. So point A here is the life after death, ignoring religious beliefs. There's no scientific proof of the afterlife has been found. Thus, the only way somebody's soul and memory lives on after death is through memories. Hence the common phrase, they live on in your heart once someone dies. Subpoint B here is that the crimes of Pablo Escobar killed a reported amount of 4,000 people with him and his gang, the cartel. Killing is inherently a net bad on society because it impacts out to death. Also, killing is inherently immoral by allowing ourselves to remember a man who committed such immoral actions. We are allowing his memory to live on. So let's just link this out. Oh, wait, give me a second. Okay, so let's just link this out. Remembering someone who had such a net detriment on society is immoral because we're allowing the souls of the wicked to live on in society. The impacts of this is immorality, and people whose families were hurt by Pablo Escobar remember Pablo Escobar as like a terrible person, and that leads to like a bad mental health for them. So we should get past, or like we should get past the Pablo Escobar. Bad mental health, or because they don't want someone wicked to be remembered if they did something so bad because they did something so bad to their families. So a bad mental health is a lower quality of life for families of over 4,000 people. And let's just say that right now in pop culture, or what's happening right now, is that what Pablo Escobar is being glorified right now, and through television such as Narcos, and we're not remembering the families enough. So that's why we should get past Pablo Escobar, and we regret the memorialization. And with that, I said just a strong affirmation ballot. Thank you.
Before the round continues, I encourage debaters to read the paradigms of the judges that they have before the round starts, and to be mindful of being clearly understood.
Okay. Before I begin, is everyone okay with an off-time roadmap? No? Okay. Okay, then with that, my time will begin on my first word. So before I start talking about the resolution, I would just like to address, I think, what the government side of the case ran at the beginning of theirs, which was regarding the impact of turning our cameras on Zoom and its impact on the environment. Just a quick word on this. It didn't seem okay. Obviously, like, relevancy in the debate is completely out of the question, but in terms of their statistics that they kept shouting about CO2 and how the cameras were going to like ultimately lead to the decline of the world due to climate change. First of all, my team is just me and my partner Mia, and it's just two people having their camera on. So really, in terms of scope, that's a complete over exaggeration of the ultimate impact. Additionally, they talk about how it's disrespectful to members of parliamentary debate in some way for it like showing people that we don't care that it's going to lead to like the end of parliamentary debate. But in the real sense, these two contestants also are in an online tournament and enrolled in an online tournament. And so it's important to keep that in mind when making accusations to other participants about having their camera on. It's and about the impact on the climate and itself. But I'm not going to spend any more time on that. Moving into the actual resolution, the opposition side strongly negates the resolution that this House regrets the memorialization of Pablo Escobar in popular culture. We agree with their weighing mechanism, utilitarianism, or net benefits. We did not hear a definition of this House from the government side of this case. So our definition for this House is citizens of the modern world. It's pretty broad. It encompasses a lot, and it is beneficial to both sides of this case. It's not in any way skewed. And because they did not provide a definition themselves, this definition stands. We define I believe they defined most other points, and we concede to most of their other definitions. In terms of pop culture, it's just culture based on the taste of ordinary people rather than the educated elite. Moving into our first contention, which is about memorializing Pablo Escobar as a symbol rather than his course of action. Pablo Escobar in himself is one of the few drug lords who are actually memorialized to such a degree that he is. That is why we were debating this in the first place. And there's obviously going to be a reason for Pablo Escobar being held to this pedestal that other drug lords are not held to by the general public, by citizens of the world. And that is to say that most drug lords who entered the business are not in it for the same reasons that Pablo Escobar was. That is to say that they're in it for wealth and greed and for their own personal gain, whereas Pablo Escobar was very widely known for not being a man who took all this money and gave it to himself, but rather he used his money for reasons and showed that he did not have any sort of reliance on his money for his own internal reasons, but rather used it for more virtuous endeavors. Escobar, as a child, was expelled from school and left without a source of income or any housing. So in a real way, Escobar was sent into a position where he had one of two choices. He could either fall victim to a situation and basically die, or he could find a way out of it. And although the way he found out of it may have not the most beneficial at the time, if we're looking at it in his memory, we can see that the way that he handled his situation, becoming such a large and influential drug lord, was widely different from how other drug lords did, and that is why he's being memorialized. That is to say that one of his great nicknames across Colombia was, and across the world, is Robin Hood. After he used to hand out cash to the poor, he built several hundreds of housings for homeless people in Colombia, parks, football stadiums, hospitals, schools, and churches for people within the state. He was using this money that he gained not for his own personal success necessarily, or completely for greed, but he was actually giving back, and he was providing some philanthropy rather than just simply using bad money for bad things. Additionally, his success could have led, people are memorializing his perseverance, his empathy, and his ability, again, to not fall victim to the greeds and the evils of the industry. Additionally, in comparison to these other drug lords that we're evaluating, the reason that these people aren't memorialized is part of the reason because not El Chapo is another drug lord, and he was seen as like almost despicable because of not only the way that he was taking in the money like Escobar, but the way that he was treating the people underneath him. He treated employees as disposable. They talk about all the murders in their first contention or in their second contention, whichever one it was. They talk about the murders that he participated in, but again, those were 4,000 people killed. Those were not necessarily all personal murders. If we're gonna be talking about whether we should memorialize people based on how many people were killed, we should think about George Washington or Harry Truman and how many innocent people were killed under their rule. And it simply wasn't just like they were going out and murdering people. Like, there's always more to that. So in terms of that idea, it goes, that is non-unique. Additionally, and our second contention is about the importance of remembering and raising awareness. They talk about how we're glorifying Pablo Escobar in his remembrance, but in a real way, we're also providing a platform for people who have fallen victim and for to raise awareness about the actions that he participated in. Through his memorialization, we not only address the past, but highlight the ongoing issues such as war and drugs and police violence. And by looking at the past and how Escobar impacted Colombian people, Colombian people will be more incentivized to understand and prevent the economic disparities and state weakness created by these environment. Narcos depicts Escobar's impact and then again spreads awareness. It's one of the most popular shows that was produced on Netflix. And when people walked out of that show, not everyone was walking out saying, oh my gosh, like I want to be a drug dealer. People walked out of that show with a real, more foundational understanding of how his actions as a human being, how drug dealing in general across the world impacts people, as well as how his actions of a human being differed from other drug dealers. And that's why people walk out of that show with a greater understanding of the symbol and what he stood for, and we're more memorializing that. Additionally, institutions always need to be reformed for the betterment of society. So his actions were, again, a highlight of the weakness of the institutions. Once he because of the actions he did as a drug lord, that indicated reform, and that caused the United States to make these reservations in order to not only aid their citizens and aid their country, but it also shows that other countries were able to see these faults and build upon that. And so in another way, his actions were aiding in the future and betterment of society. And it gives insights into Colombian history and demonstrates the resilience of the Colombian people to get over a struggle. Documentaries such as Escobar Paradise offer a lot of more humanized view of Escobar's reign and how it impacted the Colombian people. So it's really bringing humanity to an aspect of to Colombian people, again, as they mentioned, that because of all the drug dealings that were not, again, exclusively Escobar, but there were a lot of large drug dealers and drug lords who lived in Colombia and were a symbol of Colombia in that way. By bringing attention to these and humanizing them through these resources that were highlighting Escobar's journey and his existence as a drug dealer and drug lord, they show the humanity within Colombia and provide empathy for Colombian citizens. And then moving into our third and final contention, doing more good. It's not providing a net harm to this house. And that is to say that again, this is something I talked about earlier about memorializing his symbol and not his action specifically. People do not memorialize Escobar because they want to step into his shoes and they want to become a drug lord, but rather it is the idea of a symbol, and people are walking out of there with the holistic narrative that needs to be looked at. The memorialization efforts like films and documentaries give the Colombian families a platform to speak, and these ultimately are served as an educational tool. So if it weren't for his large impact as a drug lord, there wouldn't be the same large response from the general media who would see this, interpret it, and reproduce these different forms of media in order to educate people and bring again humanity that will ultimately be aiding Colombia in its recovery from the past. From these, we have to keep in mind again, like these drug dealers and these drug lords that were so detrimental to Colombia were typically during like the 1970s. I believe that Escobar died sometime in the 1970s, as well as El Chapo. And so these people, this is something that happened in the past. The documentaries and media coverage is coming out now, and as you've seen, because of that, it's actually able to humanize the Colombian region and bring awareness to that. And balances on storytelling with accountability, as well as the bad parts of history, must be taken into consideration for a better future, are critical in looking at how this has impacted the house. Again, the house is the citizens of the modern world. So we're seeing again that the house is now not only becoming more educated, gaining sympathy, but also commemorating a cause of good and giving back to people and providing philanthropy and service that is ultimately going to be super impactful for the people of the world. And with that, please cast an opposition ballot. Thank you.
Okay, let me get my timer set up. Okay. My time starts in 3, 2, 1. Hello, Judge. My name is Ara Dixit, and I'm going to be the second affirmation speaker on this resolution. So I'm gonna start off with covering the theory shell. So extend the interpretation, extend the violation. Their only response to this whole shell was that there's a low scope of 2 cameras in use, right? But again, if 2 people say they have a low scope, then it's just gonna create a ripple effect, right? Because everyone is just gonna say they have a low scope. Like every single person is just gonna say, oh, well, I'm not having an effect on the climate because I'm just one person, right? But that's not how it works. Every single person has an impact. Every single person has a carbon footprint. And we all need to do our job to help climate change, which is an argument we make in this shell, which inherently goes conceited, which means that every single person in the world needs to do something to solve climate change. Sure, one person doesn't have enough scope, but if everyone just makes that excuse that, oh, I'm just one person, then no one would ever actually solve climate change, right? We never actually get any resolutions solved. If everyone just says, I'm one person, I can never make a change. That's not the point. Everyone has to recognize that they are doing something to cause a carbon footprint, and they have to make a change. And then their other response to this is that we're also enrolled in an online tournament. But the thing is, sure, we're enrolled in an online tournament and we're debating right now. But at least given our circumstances, we're doing our best to mitigate climate change by actually turning our cameras off, right? That is like one of the best things you can do in these circumstances of like being enrolled in this online tournament. Sure, maybe that has an impact, but at least we're keeping our cameras off so we have a less of a carbon footprint, right? And then just extending the standards again, we give you these statistics on how video conferencing emits more than 1,000 grams of carbon dioxide. And comparisons, that would be like the emissions of almost half a gallon. And so, yeah, putting this into perspective, there's around 300 million web calls every single day with an average 40-minute call time. This leads us to a CO2 emission of 240 over 240. I think that's 240 billion grams, which could be decreased to a mere 9.6 billion grams. Although we aren't completely solving the problem by just like doing this online debate, sure, but it's undeniable that web calls actually cause this huge impact, and by turning your camera on, this impact is scaled a lot more. So the best thing you can do in this circumstance is literally just turn your camera off. And this huge scale that's being caused is the internal link into climate change increasing, and over 250,000 people are estimated to die due to climate change by 2050. And so if all these people die and climate change get even worse, then this is also the internal link to more people dying for climate change, which means that there's going to be less education because everyone at some point is going to be dead from climate change. So yeah, it's going to be 250,000 by 2050. But if people keep turning their cameras on and keep having their videos on, then by 2070, by 2100, what's going to happen, right? Eventually, everyone's going to be dead from climate change if people keep having this mentality that I'm just one person, I can't solve anything, and keeping their cameras on, and which is going to remove education from parliamentary debate because it's not going to exist if everyone's dead. And again, extending a priori, know the rules of the game before you play the game, and also make sure you drop the debater on this because again, they're internally linking to less education, and less education is an issue that we drop the debater on. And again, RBI is bad. So getting onto the case now, getting straight onto AF case. So their response to our contention on this whole immorality of remembering the wicked, they mentioned how on this 4,000 people he killed statistic, right? They said it was under his rule, right? So if we're talking about murder, we should talk about George Washington, they said. But the difference is that Pablo Escobar did this out of cold blood, right? George Washington led the army in a revolutionary war to fight for his people. That's why so many people died under his rule, right? But Pablo Escobar was the leader of the cartel, and he did this out of cold blood, which means his reasoning was different than George Washington. So for example, extending this to the links that we mentioned for this argument, when George Washington men died, right? Obviously their families mourned, but they didn't have a bad image of George Washington in their head because of the fact that their people died, because they knew that George Washington was leading them to victory, right? But in this case of Pablo Escobar, the families of the over 4,000 people that he killed, they have a bad memory of Pablo Escobar because they know he killed them out of cold blood, which means that this causes generational trauma, right? And this causes people, again, extending this to our links, is the internal link to worse mental health for these families, which internally links to lower quality of life for these families of over 4,000 plus people. So you can extend and buy that links chain that this is inherently going to link into worse quality of life for the whole people he killed, because by memorializing his name, it's going to just cause worse mental health. It's literally just, that's the definition of PTSD, right? After a traumatic event, you get a lot worse and your mental health gets a lot worse. That's the exact same thing that's going to happen in this case right here. And so and extending our first contention again on Colombia's reputation. Again, they never responded to the fact that Colombia's reputation is still going to be harmed by the fact that this person was such a bad person, and he was inherently portrayed by the media as a bad person, right? No matter what they're doing, my opponent said that we're characterizing his symbol rather than his actions. As the media, he was still portrayed as a bad person, right? Which caused lingering effects on Colombia's trade relationships with other countries because it harmed their reputation. And this inherently caused them 42.5% of Colombia's poverty rate, right? And the stop of trade inherently made Colombia's economy even worse, which eventually led to with poverty increasing, because just a 20% drop in GDP leads to a substantial increase in poverty. So getting on to the negations case, they mentioned how Escobar, as a child, he was in a really bad situation, right? And how because of this, it might be he at least became successful, right? At least he made his way out of it. But the thing is, responding to a bad situation by being a bad person still causes that detriment. And this is the whole problem with memorializing a person like Pablo Escobar. His example is one of a person who was in a bad situation and then he became a bad person. So, or at least, even if you don't buy the fact that he became a bad person, he killed people, right? So by portraying him, by memorializing him, we're encouraging this fact that if you're in a bad situation, you can commit inherently bad actions no matter what your intentions are with those actions. Killing is bad, right? No matter what your intentions are, it's still a bad thing to do. So which is an argument we make in the first speech, which goes dropped. So by memorializing him, you're inherently encouraging people to actually think that this is an okay thing to do, to commit bad actions if you're in a bad situation. And like, how many people did he have to sacrifice to help other people, right? There's other ways to help people, to build hospitals, right? You can work hard, become smarter, get an education, right? No matter what your status is. For example, Oprah Winfrey, like a famous talk show host, grew up in poverty, right? But she didn't go out and kill people to become successful and help other people, right? She actually built her reputation up. She actually got better, right? There's other ways to go about this stuff than just kill people. So in no way can you justify killing people because you're doing like a good deed, right? And you're killing people out of just cold blood, right? Like, you're killing these people out of cold blood. And sure, you're using this money to build hospitals, but you're inherently committing a bad action. And yeah, and then just ending it off here with this whole like memorializing his symbol, not his action. The problem is with documentaries like these, when they're watched, the media tends to memorialize his actions rather than his symbol, right? For example, with terrorist groups, we don't look at their symbols, right? We don't look at what they stand for. Sorry, we look at their actions, which is why you vote F. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Mia Podlick, and I'm the second speaker for the opposition in today's debate. My time will begin on my first word. Me and my partner still stand on the firmest opposition of the resolution. This House regrets the memorialization of Pablo Escobar in popular culture. Now, I'd like to first start off with their K that they run on us at the beginning of both of their speeches. They talk about the idea of this carbon emissions through use of video call cameras and how that's bad and how we're all going to die from climate change. However, I'd like to point out that they are literally on computers right now using technology which emits way more carbon emissions to either like to create these technological devices, and so there's a lot more, or there's a lot less unethical and ethical practices that we can be participating in. If they really care about stopping the problem to protect parliamentary debate, they should have enrolled in an online tournament. My partner literally pointed this out. Their second speaker responds to this and say that sure, we are enrolled in an online tournament, but our camera is off. Yet they give you like, how much impact is this really going to make on climate change? Is this really going to all make us like out to die essentially? So right, let's look at this. From this technological camera updates, this is like maybe like, I think technology is about a very small percentage of these audio calls going into climate change already, right? And so how much is this really affecting the climate, right? They're making this entirely and blowing it out of proportions, exaggerating this just because they don't have a strong case in this debate. And I'll go into that further, right? They're taking away from the importance of the foundation of having a debate in the first place. If why are we even debating here if they're just going to run this on us, right? If every individual has such a large impact, if we turn off our camera, are we actually going to stop climate change, Judge? Ask yourself that question. The answer is no. Also, in terms of energy, the scope of this whole tournament has small impact, right? We're going to really look at impacts here. If we are dropping debaters, everyone should be dropped because of this. So their entire case just doesn't make sense. Drop that from the debate, Judge. It's completely irrelevant and takes away from the impact and the educational foundations and part of this debate. So let's talk about their contention one, right? This is about Colombia's reputation. So let's talk about this here, right? They're much more complex. So they talk about being portrayed in the media as a bad person, but people are much more complex than just certain good and bad actions. We have to evaluate persons as their whole and everything that they have done. While yes, we have to look at Pablo Escobar's bad actions, which we address throughout our entire case, right? And how we can draw on from the past, as we do in all historical contexts, we draw from the past to create change for the future. Also, we talk about how in our contention too specifically, how these certain documentaries are made so we can make change, right? People come out of watching influential different types of movies and documentaries and seeing how that's why people watch like harms to the climate, like documentaries and stuff like that, watching bad things that people are doing and changing their actions because of it. One of their subpoints in their contention one is that citizens want the government to, and citizens in the government want to move on from his history. However, since his death, the country has entered an era of rebuilding and reconstruction. We've seen that this is already happening, right? So I don't know how memorializing is exactly going against rebuilding and reconstructing. We also know that Colombia is growing rapidly economically. We've seen this, that they're the third largest GDP in Latin America already. So if they're really having such a bad economic output, why isn't the other team giving us any like tangible evidence? Because they can't. They talk about how the Monaco building was destroyed and how it's symbolic of the city's efforts to break away from his violent past, right? And so we can see, I'm pretty sure that actually this building was actually destroyed by his rivals. And so Monaco is a place where he stayed. This is not a form of memorializing him. So that's just completely out of context. They talk about how this hurts the country's reputation for years and how it still hurts trade and how it's not as impactful today. So they're already pointing out how it's not impactful today. But then my partner POIs them, right? And she says, "Do you have any evidence of this?" And they say that 9/11, after 9/11, the U.S. stopped trade with Middle Eastern countries. Judge. We're talking about Colombia here, which is not a Middle Eastern country, has nothing to do with 9/11. So this is completely irrelevant. They can give you no evidence. We're judging here off of evidence and logic today, and this has no evidence or logic really to it, right? They're talking about how like Colombia is currently hurting an economy and the poverty rate, but like I like to stress to you, Judge, that they have the third largest GDP in Latin America, and also their economy has been building since his death. So that's why their contention one completely falls through. The contention two talks about the philosophical remembering of the wicked, right? So they give you the idea that there's no scientific proof of the afterlife currently. Then why are people memorialized all, right? Why are funerals are important to popular culture, right? This is important to people's belief systems, to their values, right? This is what we're talking about. We also got to talk about the importance. They try to throw out and try to kind of get rid of like despite the fact of religious beliefs, but religious beliefs are part of popular culture. We are talking about that today. This is specifically relevant to this debate, so we have to take into account all people's belief system, because as we talk about, the scope of this debate are the citizens of the world through our definition of this house, which goes unrefuted. Under the contention too, they also talk about him being essentially glorified, right? And how we're not remembering the families of Colombia enough. However, I like to mention in our contention too, which has been brought up by my partner, that these films and documentaries actually give Colombian families an opportunity to speak. Multiple parts of these documentaries, we see Colombian citizens talking about this. We are giving them the platform to talk about their experience, right? This is directly benefiting the citizens to finally have their experience talked about, to finally be able to, rewrite their story and rewrite what Colombia is, right? They talk about specifically the crimes, right? They bring this out through refutations to our case. They talk about how these crimes, there's 4,000 killed, how this is a net bad on society, and how, and they try, my partner comes in and refutes this, why these weren't personal murders, and we can like talk about like Washington. And then their second speaker comes in and says that the difference is that Pablo did this out of cold blood. However, we also have to take into account through these killings, there's a bunch of people in crossfire. This is not out of cold blood. And isn't all types of murder kind of with the intent of murder in cold blood, right? We're talking about war here. That is in cold blood. So throw that out. Also, some of these murders were done by associates, not Pablo Escobar himself. And they also mention as another refutation to our refutation about Washington, how this is causing generational trauma, which is like impactfully a lower quality of life. However, this is non-unique. This happens in all types of murder and stuff like that, all types of killing in general, right? People's mental health declines for a number of reasons, and families lose members every day. They give no tangible evidence that this is directly from Pablo Escobar and his doing, so drop their contention too. Now let's look at our case, the opposition's case. We give you our contention one, which is memorializing, which talks about memorializing as like his cause and his symbol over his course of action, right? So to this, they refute and say by responding to a bad situation, by becoming a bad person, is encouraging people to commit bad actions like killing. You see bad things happen on movies and TVs all the time, and just because you saw a movie where someone killed somebody doesn't mean, oh, I left the movie theater and now I feel like killing somebody. That's not how it works. They're totally exaggerating this. This is no link to how this happened, yes, but people are memorializing his murders. There's 25,000 people who came to his funeral not to memorialize his murders, but the change he made, right? My partner talks about all the things that he did for the poor, how he's memorialized for his perseverance, his empathy, and his ability not to fall victim to the greed and evils of the industry. He was literally a victim of the industry, right? They give another refutation that other way to rebuild hospitals and how Ilford didn't kill people to be successful. These are different situations, very different results. They talk about how like education, right? Um, but he was literally expelled from school. How is he supposed to get this education? If you're fighting for survival, also going to school every day is not your biggest priority. So drop the refutations, and this is why our contention one still stands. As our contention two, we talk about raising importance, and they really can't do anything to touch this, right? We talk about the documentaries, how this gives people platforms, how this demonstrates how how the Colombian people need to change and how they need to evolve, right? We ought to look to history to make change, right? And they say that these documentaries only look at actions. Yes, these documentaries are directly looking at actions to create future change, right? This gives, like I mentioned countless times, this gives these Colombian families a platform to speak about this, right? This incentivizes people to prevent and understand the economic disparities and the state weaknesses during his time period, right? And this is why our contention two still stands. And our contention three, that this does more good than harm to this house, they touch nothing on, right? Everything still stands, how this gives our platform to victims, how it balances storytelling with accountability, and how bad parts of history must be known to create a better future. And that's why our case still stands and there's completely falls through. Judge, I encourage you to cast an opposition ballot. Thank you so much.
Okay. My name is Una Norvell. This is the third and final speech for the opposition side of this debate, and my time will begin on my first word. We still strongly negate the resolution that this House forgets the memorialization of Pablo Escobar in popular culture. Just a quick review of the K that was run on us earlier about CO2 and carbon emissions, as my partner discussed, and we've mentioned many times, two people having their camera off isn't really going to end the world and have this exaggerated output that they say. If you don't believe Judge and you believe that, yes, like if everyone has this mindset that we'll get into a rabbit hole, we can talk about in terms of energy, the scope of the whole tournament in itself is small, and if you're dropping debaters, everyone should be dropped for this. And in terms of the rabbit hole, if that's such the case, then if we turn off our camera, are we really going to stop climate change in that sense? If everyone just decides to turn off their camera, do we not have to worry about it in 2050? Like, is it not a big deal? It's really such a narrow, pinpointed thing to point out and try and like just dissect that is really not relevant to the debate in itself. And again, if they didn't want to contribute to CO2, they shouldn't have joined an online tournament. Going into our first contention, which is about the symbolism of Pablo Escobar and the intentions that and his symbol as a Robin Hood, handing out cash to the poor and building houses for the homeless, parks, football stadiums, and providing public infrastructure. They discuss how, oh, well, he could have done that without being a murderer, but and how his killing is like the only thing that he's been being remembered by. But as we mentioned, there are 25,000 people at his funeral in Colombia. These 25,000 people weren't going there again to celebrate his killings. They were going there to celebrate how he changed his story, how he changed his journey. He was given this option. He was put into the pedestal of being a major drug lord, and he took that idea and instead of going and killing these people in true cold blood, as they said, he did it, and then he gave the money to the public. He allowed for public like people to continue to exist and thrive. And as we have said, the house of this round is citizens of the world, and the net benefits is our weighing mechanism. So if we're looking at this on the grand scheme of things, 4,000 lives versus all the lives of people who were saved from this housing and from the public infrastructure, if we're really weighing on that, we're seeing that ours has so much more impact in his memorialization, and that's why it's important that people continue to memorialize him. Additionally, moving into our second contention was about the importance of raising awareness. We talk about how it gives families a voice and how institutions were able to be performed because of the actions of Pablo Escobar. They talk about how the voice is like limited. In fact, like the way they touch on this is pretty limited in itself. And they talk about how the voices, how people such as like Oprah didn't have to kill people to move on to success. But as we said, like it's different situations. Like Oprah is such an extreme example from such like an out of place environment. She was nowhere near in the same situation that Pablo Escobar was. So to say that she didn't have to do the same things that he did to get to where she is, that's incredibly true. Neither of them were following the same path. And so to say that her journey was better than his or was like worse or whatever her memorialization, it's going to be different inherently. Again, they didn't touch on our contention of no net harm, so all of that stands through. In terms of their first contention about Colombia's reputation, they provide a lot of statistics about things that aren't from Colombia, like 9/11, which was a terrorist attack, but as my partner mentioned, Escobar was not like a terrorist. He was not attacking the United States. And so that was definitely like a really out of place example in that case. Additionally, when they talk about Colombia losing out and how it was hurting the economy and poverty rate, again, we're talking about the current world, people right now memorializing him right now. And so the memorializing of him really wasn't impacting the Colombia's overall GDP and its presence in the economy as of right now. It's the third largest GDP and has been increasing ever since his death. So really this statistic that they provide about Colombia's economy dropping has gone fairly well contested by my partner, and therefore that case falls. Additionally, their entire second contention about the philosophical remembering of people being killed, again, falls through as we talk about the difference between doing it out of cold blood and the situation that he was in, and how the murders in themselves weren't personal. And again, they talk about the mental toll that it took on families, and mental health and how it was deeply impactful of that. But there's so many other things that go into mental health, making the argument is non-unique. Additionally, people are dying every single day. This is just a fact that people have families. So saying that families are going to be impacted on mental health by death, again, it's completely irrelevant. So on those cases, we fall through because they fail to contest us on why his symbol is important, how that is being memorialized, and the importance of raising awareness through media that comes and shows him as a person, and how it brings awareness to not only the drug trade, but also his impact of being empathetic and using his money for philanthropy rather than for greed. Again, they didn't touch our contention 3, so that falls through. And with that, please cast an opposition ballot. Thank you.
Okay, let me just get my timer. Hold up. Okay, so let my speech begin on 3, 2, on my first word. Hi, Judge. My name is Prakulnar. I'm going to be the third speaker on the affirmation side today. So, first, let me just address like the theory. I just wanted to say, extend the interp, extend the violation, extend the standards. Also extend the issue about competing interests of reasonability. The entire time the neg has responded to our theory using reason, but we tell you that they must provide a counter interp because counter interps of reasonability because reasonability has no bright line. We also tell you RBIs are bad and wait, let's see. RBIs are bad. A priori, put the theory over the case. Also drop the debater, not the argument, because to prevent further abuse of Parley. Okay, next. Is turning your camera off going to stop climate change? Well, yes. We mentioned that if everyone turns off the camera, the amount of carbon emissions would go down by 96 billion tons, still significantly reducing it. If you don't buy that, we're at least doing something about climate change. They also mentioned how everyone should be dropped because online debate is bad. But the thing is that we're doing online debate to bring awareness about climate change. We run this theory show to create a mindset that everybody has an impact on the environment, that everybody has a climate footprint and must do something about it. We're sacrificing a few carbon emissions to build awareness. We're sacrificing turning our cameras off to stop carbon emissions, to build awareness, to make people have the mindset that they need to do something, such as turning off your cameras. By voting us, you set a norm, a precedent that people should do their part to solve climate change. By voting them, you are setting a norm that the individual person cannot do anything about climate change, and we must all give up. Okay, they're internally linking to climate change worsening because they get a lot of people, or it gets a lot worse, and then that's going to result in people dying, and people dying is going to result in the collapse of Parley debate, and it's going to result in less education. Okay, next point. I just want to go over their like a contradiction within their case. They tell you about how like Pablo Escobar was this like really big he was like a Robin Hood, right? Okay, but he killed people in order to achieve this. He killed people and he was a drug lord in order to achieve like any of this. And also by calling him a Robin Hood, this contradicts their point of not glorifying him. They tell you that these documentaries and everything that's made only to show how bad his actions were, but right now they're telling you about how he was a Robin Hood. So it's not. That's a contradiction because it's clearly glorifying him by calling him a Robin Hood. So that's the sole reason why the victims are mad, because their input is not getting spread. Their perspective on the situation is not getting spread because right now all of these shows, all of these television shows, these documentaries are all focusing on the glorification of Pablo Escobar. They're not focusing on like the bad actions he had. They're just focusing on it just for the sole purpose of money and just yeah. Okay. So other than that, let's go. Let's see. Okay, yeah, just to get in some refutes, we tell you that on our first. Okay, yeah. So on our first contention, we tell you that due to Colombia's reputation being bad due to Pablo Escobar, it resulted in them not getting any trade. So we tell you that from countries such as the U.S., and the European Union and other Latin American countries in the 1990s to 2000s, Colombia was not getting any trade due to Pablo Escobar's bad reputation. Now, this was really detrimental towards Colombia's economy, and they got no trade, and it resulted in the worst of the people. And we tell you that we give you stats about how much of Colombia's population is in poverty, and 42% of their population is in poverty, and this is due to the effects of the trade that happened, or like the lack of trade due to Pablo Escobar's effect on the country's reputation. Okay, so our second contention on the philosophical and morality of remembering the wicked, we're telling you that that we said that it's better to just move past it because that's what the victims want to do, because they get PTSD from just remembering these actions, and that's probably not what they want. And right now in the world, they see that people are glorifying Pablo Escobar rather than considering him as someone who is bad or who had bad actions. They're considering him as, they're glorifying him. They're showing him. We're seeing like society is seeing the good sides of Pablo Escobar, which is just that he helped people in Colombia. That is not what we want. We want to know him. That's why we regret the memorialization of him, because right now all society sees was that this dude was just helping out people in Colombia. He built hospitals. That's what we see him as. That's what the world sees him as. But that's why we should be addressing the issue that is that these people don't get what their perspective on it was. They don't get everyone doesn't get to know that he was a bad person. Also, yeah. And sure, we don't have a quantifiable impact, but they don't either. We tell you that Colombia's economy gets worse and it's a net detriment for the people. They tell you that there's more hospitals and better facilities, but never how many hospitals and facilities, how many people benefit from this. They never told you that either, because neither side can quantify impacts. You weigh probability over magnitude, and by our argument that the probability of the media internally linking into seeking him as a bad person is bad. With that, I would like to end this piece there. Thank you.
Well done. I guess we're gonna take a while. We're probably gonna turn our cameras off in a bold move, saving energy and making a decision.